22-year-old Ashley Ellerin was attending a prestigious fashion school in Los Angeles, USA. She had an incredible passion for fashion. On top of that, she was naturally outgoing and sociable, rarely missing gatherings with friends, and she was strikingly beautiful. With both looks and charm, she was the kind of person who instantly drew attention the moment she entered a room, someone who truly sparkled. Ashley seemed to have nothing but a bright, rosy future ahead of her. So what on earth happened to her? Welcome to Bitter Clues. My name is Brian, and I will be telling today's story, the true identity of a Hollywood serial killer. Let's dive in. On the 31st of December 2000, the very last day of the year, Ashley attended a New Year's party hosted by a friend. It was there that she met Ashton Kutcher for the first time, who was an up-and-coming actor at the time. Ashton Kutcher, an incredibly familiar name to us today. He's a famous actor now, but back then, he had just landed a lead role in a TV sitcom and was being recognized as Hollywood's next rising star. The two quickly grew close at the party, bonding over their shared interest in fashion. They began contacting each other almost every day, and before long, a subtle, flirtatious tension, something like a situation friendship, started to form. Eventually, the question came up, should we go on a date? On the 21st of February 2001, the date was finally set. Ashley had been eagerly counting down the days, but on the day of the date, Ashton suddenly had a schedule conflict. It was an invitation he couldn't easily refuse. Senior actors, fellow colleagues, and staff were all gathering at a veteran actor's home to watch the Grammy Awards together, followed by a late-night party. For a rookie actor, this was not something he could turn down. So Ashton asked Ashley for her understanding and suggested that once the party loosened up, he would quietly slip out on his own so they could still have dinner together. Since he was still a newcomer, he thought it wouldn't be a problem to leave unnoticed. However, once he arrived at the party, things didn't go as planned. Fellow actors, colleagues, and staff kept approaching him nonstop to chat. Leaving suddenly would have been noticeable, and in such a tight-knit industry, it could easily lead to a bad reputation. At 8:24 p.m., after much hesitation, Ashton called Ashley again. "I'm really sorry. I think I'm going to be even later. I'll really try to get out as soon as I can." Ashley reassured him, "It's okay. It's an important event. Work comes first." She even told him she had just finished showering and would have more time to get ready, putting him at ease. After hanging up, Ashton stayed at the gathering and wasn't able to leave until 10 p.m. He immediately called Ashley, but something felt off. He called again and again. No answer. At that moment, Ashton assumed she must be upset because he had kept her waiting. He quickly drove to her house. When he arrived, Ashley's car was parked outside. He thought, she must not have gone out yet. He rang the doorbell. Light was seeping through the crack in the door, so he was certain someone was inside. But no matter how long he waited, rang the bell, there was no response. He knocked and called out, "Ashley, I'm here," but still nothing. Just in case, he tried turning the doorknob, but the door was firmly locked. Growing uneasy, Ashton peered inside through a side window, and that's when he noticed something strange. Red wine appeared to be splattered across the floor. At the time, Ashton thought, she must have gotten tired of waiting and went out drinking with other friends. Feeling awkward about entering, he blamed himself and decided to leave. Early the next morning, Ashley's roommate Jennifer returned home after partying all night. She was severely hungover, her stomach churning, and all she wanted to do was shower and go straight to bed. The moment Jennifer stepped inside the house, she was shocked. The place was in complete chaos, and most disturbingly, there was a trail of red liquid running from the front entrance all the way to the bathroom. It was thick and sticky, almost like jelly. But upon seeing this, Jennifer made a fatal mistake. She thought, Ashley really does love playing pranks. She must have brought some fake movie blood to scare me. Trying to hold back a laugh, she followed the bloodstains. But the moment she reached the bathroom doorway, Jennifer's expression turned cold. Ashley, there, lying naked on the floor and bleeding heavily, was Ashley. In that instant, Jennifer realized the killer might still be inside the house. Panicking, she fled outside as fast as she could. She barely managed to get into her car before calling 911. Soon after, the police arrived at the scene and launched a full-scale investigation. Ashley had met a truly horrific death. Her throat had been cut, and she had suffered 12 fatal stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. In addition, her head had been stabbed approximately 15 centimeters deep, damaging both her skull and brain. When combined with the wounds that showed she had fought back until the very end, investigators discovered a total of 47 stab wounds across her entire body. One detail immediately caught investigators' attention. Ashley had been found naked near the bathroom. This suggested she had been attacked right after stepping out of the shower. Based on this, investigators estimated that the murder occurred shortly after 8:24 p.m., the time of Ashley's final phone call. Using that time frame, police canvassed the neighborhood, asking whether anyone had seen suspicious individuals or heard unusual noises. However, no meaningful witness testimony emerged. Ashley's house required two separate keys, one for the main gate and another for the front door to gain entry. Since there were no signs of forced entry, investigators began to suspect that the perpetrator was someone Ashley knew well enough to possess a key. At this point, the first person to come under suspicion was Ashton. After hearing about Ashley's death, he voluntarily went to the police station himself. The reason was that he had touched the front door handle the night before, and it weighed heavily on his mind. He worried his fingerprints might implicate him as a suspect. However, the estimated time of death coincided with the time he had been at the party, where numerous witnesses had seen him. As a result, he was quickly cleared as a suspect. The next person to fall under suspicion was the landlord, a 41-year-old man named Mark Durbin. At first glance, it seemed odd to suspect the landlord, but in reality, Ashley wasn't just a tenant. It appeared the two had been involved in a secret romantic relationship. As it turned out, Ashley had also slept with him on the evening of the murder. However, the investigation confirmed that Mark had been with his family at the estimated time of the crime, providing him with a solid alibi. As a result, he was cleared as a suspect. The investigation team then questioned everyone around Ashley, friends, acquaintances, and family members, but nothing substantial came up. On top of that, there were almost no traces left behind by the killer at the crime scene. The case soon reached a dead end. Then one day, Ashley's roommate Jennifer suddenly remembered a man. It was Mike the boiler repairman she had encountered not long before. This dates back to the fall of 2000. At the time, Ashley was dating a man named Chris. One day, the two of them were chatting casually in front of her house when Chris's tires suddenly went flat. Flustered, Chris tried to change the tire himself, but it wasn't easy. He struggled with it for a while. That's when a man approached them. He was tall, solidly built, and he introduced himself as Mike, a boiler repairman. "Would you like some help?" Perhaps his pride was bruised, but Chris declined, saying, "No, it's fine. I can handle it myself." After that, Mike naturally shifted his attention toward Ashley. The two spoke briefly, and during that short exchange, they ended up exchanging contact information. At first, their conversations were light, simple check-ins and casual messages. But as time passed, Mike's behavior began to cross a line. His interest turned into obsession. One day, he suddenly showed up at a party he hadn't even been invited to. Since he was already there, people awkwardly told him to grab a drink and enjoy himself. But Mike sat quietly in a corner, staring at Ashley the entire time. The atmosphere felt unsettling. At other times, he would stay outside Ashley's home, parked in the lot overnight, watching the room where she lived. It was deeply disturbing. The roommate, who was aware of all this, testified to the police, and Mike quickly emerged as a prime suspect. However, there was one major problem. No one actually knew who he really was. Aside from the name Mike and the fact that he claimed to be a boiler repairman, nothing about him could be confirmed. No last name, no clear address, no verified job, nothing could be uncovered. It was strange, almost as if he had deliberately kept his identity a mystery. It wasn't until a full year after the crime, in 2002, that his true identity was finally revealed. He was a 25-year-old man named Michael Gargiulo. Now, let's take a closer look at Michael Gargiulo's background. He graduated from high school in 1998 and moved to Los Angeles to pursue his dream of becoming an actor. He enrolled in the film program at the University of Southern California. While he did show some talent, there was another serious issue. Michael had strong antisocial tendencies. He struggled to get along with others and failed to adapt socially. Although he was occasionally cast in short films, the pay was nowhere near enough. Eventually, in order to cover his tuition, he began working as a security guard at nightclubs, relying on his physical strength. But fundamentally, he lacked basic social skills, so nothing in his life went smoothly. He frequently got into verbal arguments with customers and didn't get along well with his coworkers either. In fact, he was extremely arrogant, so much so that he would boast to his colleagues, saying things like, "I've killed someone before." He also had a violent temper. One day, after assaulting a customer, he was ultimately fired. Based on what they had uncovered so far, police immediately summoned Michael and questioned him about his whereabouts on the day of the murder, as well as the nature of his relationship with Ashley. His response was calm and dismissive. "Yes, I've seen Ashley a few times at parties, that's all." But this was 2002. Today, investigators could rely on cell phone forensics and location tracking to uncover the truth. Back then, however, technology was limited. So, although police strongly suspected him, there was no direct evidence tying him to the murder. Michael insisted that he wasn't particularly close to Ashley, and the investigation once again reached a frustrating standstill. Then, unexpectedly, new information came in from Illinois police. They requested cooperation in an investigation involving Michael. It was shocking. Why now? During the call, Illinois police revealed that Michael was the sole suspect in an unsolved murder case that had occurred 9 years earlier. So then, could the disturbing bragging he once made about killing someone have actually been true? The earlier case took place on the 14th of August, 1993. The victim was an 18-year-old girl named Trisha Pacaccio, who lived in Illinois. On the morning of the incident, a Saturday, Trisha's father, Rick, was heading out for work. He opened the rear door of his car and discovered his daughter lying face down inside. At first, he assumed she had passed out drunk after partying with friends the night before. But that wasn't the case. She was already dead. In disbelief, he immediately attempted CPR, but her body had already begun to stiffen from rigor mortis. What had happened to her? The night before, the party had ended relatively early, around 1 a.m. Trisha dropped off a friend and returned home alone. After parking in the garage, she headed toward the back door. That's when an attacker suddenly appeared. Her left arm was grabbed and broken, and she was stabbed 12 times. She died at the scene. During the autopsy, investigators discovered traces of the attacker's skin tissue beneath her fingernails. However, the amount was extremely small, too small for DNA analysis using the technology available at the time. The attempt failed. After examining the scene, investigators sensed that this was a planned attack by someone she knew. There were no signs of sexual assault or robbery. The attack was sudden, and there were relatively few defensive wounds. This suggested that the killer had specifically targeted Tricia and carried out a swift, precise attack. Looking more closely at Tricia's background, she was a high school student, but also a star in her church community. She had a bright personality, excelled academically, and was intelligent enough to earn scholarships and gain college acceptance. Because of that, investigators struggled to identify anyone who might have harbored enough resentment to commit such a crime. No obvious suspect emerged. In the end, the police were unable to find any answers, and 4 years passed without resolution. So how exactly was this case connected to Michael? This is crucial. Michael had been best friends with Tricia's older brother since the 2nd grade. They were inseparable as children. 4 years after Tricia's death, Michael suddenly came to the family's house, saying he had something he wanted to talk about. But once inside, he didn't actually say much. Instead, he sat in the kitchen, repeatedly glancing toward the back door. Tricia's mother didn't miss this detail. Why does he keep looking at the back door? The thought unsettled her, because that door was the exact entrance Tricia had tried to use just before she was killed. Her daughter had met her death right behind that door. Could he know something about what happened 4 years ago? Could my son's friend Mike? Half in doubt and half driven by instinct, she immediately shared her suspicions with the lead detective. At the time, there were so few suspects that police did take note of Michael. But realistically, someone glancing at a door wasn't enough to label them a suspect. It was ultimately just a mother's intuition. There was no physical evidence. While police hesitated, Michael moved to Los Angeles. And once again, 4 more years passed. Then, in 2002, forensic technology advanced to the point where DNA could be extracted from even tiny traces of skin tissue. Illinois police reopened the case. They collected DNA samples from everyone connected to Tricia, family members, friends, and even neighbors, and ran comparisons. But there was one critical omission. They had never obtained Michael's DNA. He had moved far away. So investigators began tracking him down, and that's when they discovered something unexpected. Michael was currently being investigated by Los Angeles police as a suspect in another case. That's why Illinois authorities reached out for assistance, because he was already a suspect in Ashley's murder. If Michael truly was the killer, this would mean they were dealing with a serial murderer. However, Michael refused to provide a DNA sample. To forcibly collect it, police would need a warrant. Under the U.S. Constitution, searches and seizures involving a person's body are strictly limited. DNA collection in particular raises serious privacy concerns, making warrants for forced DNA sampling extremely difficult to obtain, especially in cases like Tricia's and Ashley's, where no direct evidence existed. Securing such a warrant was nearly impossible. Desperate, investigators needed any small clue they could find. So they went back to the beginning and began meticulously reviewing Michael's past, where he had lived, when he had moved, and every detail of his history. And then, one detective found something. Looking into it, they discovered that in the past, Michael had been treated for an injury. At that hospital, he had undergone a blood test, and remarkably, that blood sample was still being stored. It's important to note that blood samples are considered part of a medical record, meaning they belong to the hospital, not the patient. Because of this, Police were able to obtain the blood using only an order granting access to medical records. Following proper procedures, the investigation team secured the blood sample. The DNA test results came back with a 99.9% match. At last, they had Michael in their grasp. But it was still too early to celebrate. Putting him on trial was another matter entirely. First, in the Illinois Tricia case, the blood found beneath her fingernails matched Michael's DNA. But prosecutors needed additional evidence. Why? Because Michael had attended the same school as Tricia, was close friends with her brother, and frequently visited their home. In fact, it was reported that the day before the murder, Michael had driven Tricia home. Given this level of contact, it was possible that his DNA could have been transferred innocently through casual contact. That possibility couldn't be ruled out. Without more decisive evidence, Illinois investigators couldn't move forward, and just like that, a suspect they had finally identified slipped through their fingers. What about the Los Angeles case? Michael was still considered a suspect, but here too, there was no concrete evidence. The situation was maddening. As the investigation stalled, Michael moved to El Monte, a city not far from Los Angeles. Nothing changed. For 3 years, he lived an ordinary life. He got a girlfriend, had a child, and started a family. Police continued to keep him under surveillance. He has to be the killer. But how do we prove it? 2 cases already, and still no evidence. There was nothing they could do. But then this is where Chapter 2 begins. In 2005, another crime occurred. A 32-year-old woman named Maria Bruno, who lived in the same apartment complex as Michael, had divorced her husband after suffering domestic abuse. She was raising 4 children on her own. Because she had 4 young children, Maria was looking for a secure place to live. That's why she chose this apartment complex. It had controlled access starting from the shared entrance, restricting entry by outsiders. It was considered quite safe. On December 1st, 2005, Maria was found dead in her home with her throat partially slit. She had suffered 17 stab wounds. Based on the wound patterns, investigators determined that the killer was left-handed. The investigation revealed that the perpetrator likely entered through the kitchen window around 1 a.m. At the scene, police found 1 blue shoe cover, the kind worn to avoid leaving footprints. What does this tell us? This wasn't an impulsive act. This was a repeat offender. After breaking up with the girlfriend he had married at the time, he moved to Santa Monica. And then, 3 years later, devastating news struck again. On the night of the 28th of April, 2008, at around 12:26 a.m., a 26-year-old woman named Michelle Murphy was sleeping in her bed when she suddenly sensed something was wrong. She opened her eyes and saw that the window was wide open. At the same time, she felt someone's presence. In the darkness, an intruder was watching her. Holding a knife in his left hand, the attacker stabbed Michelle in the chest, shoulder, and right arm. When he swung the knife for the 4th time, Michelle grabbed the blade with both hands and tried to stop it. A struggle followed. At that moment, the man's wrist was cut. Startled, the attacker hesitated, and Michelle took the opportunity to kick him with all her strength, knocking him off the bed. The man fled immediately. As he escaped, blood likely from the cut on his wrist was left on the bed and the stairs where he fell. Michelle called the police right away, and an investigation began. The bloodstains left by the intruder became the most crucial piece of evidence in the case. When the DNA was analyzed, it showed a 99.9% match, once again pointing to Michael Gargiulo. At the same time, Santa Monica police confirmed that he had also been a suspect in all previous related investigations in Illinois, Los Angeles, and El Monte. He had failed 3 times before, but this time there was definitive evidence. Blood. There was no way for him to escape. In June 2008, the serial killer Michael was finally arrested. Because there was clear probable cause, police were able to search his home. During the search, they found evidence in the attic connected to Maria, a former apartment resident who had been killed 3 years earlier. Do you remember the blue shoe cover, the only piece of evidence from Maria's case? The other half was found, the missing piece. With that, Michael was charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. However, there was a jurisdictional issue. Trisha's case was tried in an Illinois court, while the remaining cases were handled in California. A long and grueling legal battle began. Michael was arrested in 2008, but it wasn't until October 2019, 11 years later, that the California court finally delivered its verdict. Michael admitted guilt only in the final case involving Michelle, where the evidence was undeniable. But legally, that case was attempted murder, not homicide. His defense team argued that there was no direct evidence linking Michael to Ashley's murder in Hollywood. They even attempted to shift suspicion back onto the landlord, Mark. In the second apartment complex case involving Maria, the defense claimed Michael had visited the apartment for plumbing repairs and likely dropped the shoe cover accidentally. They also tried to redirect blame toward Maria's ex-husband. In response, prosecutors presented 36 DNA exhibits, along with an enormous volume of investigative reports and statements. More than 100 witnesses were called to testify. Among them was actor Ashton Kutcher, now 41 years old. After lengthy deliberation, what verdict did the jury reach? Guilty on all counts. Even then, Michael refused to accept the outcome. He continued to delay sentencing with endless excuses and legal maneuvers. The process dragged on for nearly 2 more years. Finally, in July 2021, sentencing day arrived. Michael was sentenced to death. It had taken 28 years since the first victim's death. But the story wasn't over yet. The Trisha case remained unresolved. In September 2024, Michael was transferred to Illinois to stand trial for Trisha's murder. As of December 2025, no further updates have been released. However, given the crucial DNA evidence found beneath Trisha's fingernails, experts believe he is likely to receive life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This case was an exhausting one to follow. Usually, true crime stories focus on tracking down an unknown serial killer. But in this case, everyone already knew who the killer was, and yet the murders kept happening. That was the most frustrating part of all. What struck me even more was just how crucial evidence truly is. It makes you wonder, how was it possible for this man to slip away 3 separate times? What must Michael have been feeling back then? Perhaps he was celebrating internally. He may have believed that he alone had achieved the ultimate perfect crime, a serial killer who could never be caught. Even while being named as a suspect, he went on to kill again. It's as if the instinct to kill was deeply embedded within him. It wasn't until the 4th victim that the killings finally came to an end. Now imprisoned, he might even tell himself that he was incredibly lucky. But in the end, what awaits him is either death row or life imprisonment. Lastly, this case once again made me realize how powerless justice can be without evidence. And at the same time, it showed how the relentless efforts of investigators who refused to give up may have helped ease the pain of the victims' families, even if only a little. It was truly a breathless, harrowing case. What did you think?